and honor the woman who was Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her legacy. So several people will read quotes from RBG and speak from the heart about why they're here. Who would like to go first?
I remember envying the boys long before I even knew the word feminism, because I liked shop better than cooking and sewing. She could not have said that better. Fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you, like we are doing right now. Thank you.
If there was one decision I would overrule, it would be Citizens United. I think the notion that we have all the democracy that money can buy strays so far from what our democracy is supposed to be. And I have a little piece about Citizens United here. What is Citizens United? The short answer is it's two different but related things. A political action committee, a PAC, and a Supreme Court case about election spending in which the aforementioned PAC was the plaintiff. Both lie at the center of a debate over the role corporations play in society. Citizens United was founded in 1988 by a longtime Washington political consultant and funded by the Koch brothers. It gained fame in 2009 for suing the Federal Election Commission, leading to a controversial Supreme Court case, now also commonly known as Citizens United, eliminating some restrictions on how corporations can spend money in elections. In a 5-4 court ruling, the Supreme Court justices declared unconstitutional the government restriction on independent political spending by corporations and unions, and determined the anti-Clinton broadcasts that they said should have been allowed. This was back in 2008. The decision overturned century-old precedent allowing the government to regulate such spending. As a result, Citizens United has greatly affected the way corporations and unions can spend on elections. So it has had a huge influence on our country, and RBG voted against it. And on how she would like to be remembered, someone who used whatever talent she had to do her work to the very best of her ability, and to help repair tears in her society, to make things a little better through the use of whatever ability she has, to do something, as my colleague David Suter would say, outside myself. Because I've gotten much more satisfaction for the things that I've done for which I was not paid. And I totally agree with that.
One passion we know for sure was her love of opera. She went to the opera often with her buddy, Justice Scalia. They went so often that they were asked to be supernumeraries in Die Flaudermaus. And this is what she wrote about her being as an extra in the opera. She writes, "What do I love about opera? It's glorious music, high drama, and glorious voices. An operatic voice is like no other. I was a super once, an extra, in Die Flaudermaus. I had never heard voices of that beauty so close up. It felt as if an electric shock were running through me. Most of the time, even when I go to sleep, I'm thinking about legal problems. But when I go to the opera, I'm just lost in it, loving it. And I don't think about any legal brief." If you want to be a true professional, you will do something outside yourself, something to repair tears in your community, something to make life a little better for people less fortunate than you. That's what I think a meaningful life is, living not for yourself, but for one's community.
One of the reasons why I really appreciated Ruth Bader Ginsburg was because she was fighting for equality for all people. The 14th Amendment, which was ratified in 1868, granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the U.S. and guaranteed all citizens equal protection of the laws. Ruth was an advocate for gender equality and women's rights when on the Court of Appeals, which she was appointed to, argued in front of the Supreme Court 5 of the 6 cases that became legal landmarks between 1973 and 1978. Her goal was to persuade the Supreme Court, which was all men at that time, that women and men should have the same equality and the same access to rights. She took a broad look at gender discrimination, fighting not just for the women left behind, but for the men who were discriminated against as well. So the first case she took up was one involving husbands of women who were in the military. Those husbands were not granted the same benefits that wives of military men were. And she won that argument. Then she took on the case of widowers who should receive the same benefits as their wives receive, as widows receive when their husbands die. She also won that case. And then a law in Oklahoma was struck down. And Ruth also argued this case. Women who were 18 could buy beer, but men had to wait until they were 21. And the reasoning behind that was because women were not as reckless and would not misuse beer the way men did. And that was also discriminatory. And so she had that one struck down.
True.
So after Sarah Day O'Connor resigned from the Supreme Court in 2006, Ginsburg was the only woman who was left. It was the worst of times, she said. The image to the public entering the courtroom was 8 men and then this little woman sitting to the side. That was not a good image for the public to see. But later, Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan were appointed by Obama. And Ginsburg became the senior member and the leader of the 4 Justice Liberal bloc. And she spoke for all 4 with very powerful dissenting opinions. She became known as the notorious RGB. Her image was an internet sensation. Young women had her image tattooed on their arms. Their daughters wore RBG costumes at Halloween, and t-shirts read, "You can't spell truth without Ruth." So she was often asked, when will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? Her answer was, when there are 9. People are shocked, but there have been 9 men and nobody's ever raised a question about that. And so that's the reason, those are the reasons why I really admired her and was very saddened by her death.
The quote I'm going to read today is apropos because it's raining today. And the court case that brought about her famous quote is also very apropos given what's going on with Black Lives Matter and racial discrimination that's rampant in the country. Justice Ginsburg's dissents were often more powerful than when she was in the majority. She described her dissent as, quote, appealing to the intelligence of a future day, as she never stopped believing in the better future or that the law provided a vehicle for moving the country forward. The Voting Rights Act was first passed in 1965, and I didn't realize it was only for 5 years, but it was renewed with strong bipartisan majorities during Republican administrations in 1970, that would be Nixon, under 1975 under Ford, 1982 under Reagan, and 2006 under Bush. On each occasion, Congress recognized that while selecting a candidate to vote for is a political choice, the act of voting itself is fundamentally American, a quintessential right that must be protected for all citizens. The Voting Rights Act was enacted to ensure that no citizen would be denied the right to vote because of race or color. It carried a formula, a coverage formula, that applied to certain states, obviously in the Deep South. The discrimination that took part in the South, states like Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Texas, against black voters in the 60s and the 1970s was really unbelievable. Mississippi had a notorious soap bubble test, which required black voters to correctly guess the number of bubbles in a bar of soap in order to vote. The Voting Rights Act prohibited discriminatory tests and devices like that one, and required any jurisdiction that was going to have any voting changes submit those changes to the Department of Justice. And we're talking about what's going on now. We're talking about closing polls, moving polls, requirements for more and more limited voter identification. I'm not sure everybody knows this, but in Texas, a hunting license is good enough to register to vote, but a student ID with a picture is not. That's just one example. Also, the discrimination included reductions in the early voting days, purges to voter rolls, which again are going on right now, and gerrymandering of districts to ensure that no black would be elected to Congress. So it was called pre-clearance. Any district that wanted to make any changes had to get this pre-clearance from the Justice Department. So Chief Justice Roberts, in this case of Shelby County versus Holder, and the Holder was Eric Holder. He was the Attorney General. So Shelby County was suing him because they didn't want to go along with this pre-clearance. So Chief Justice Roberts said, quote, "There is no denying, however, that the conditions that originally justified these measures no longer characterize voting in the covered districts. Nearly 50 years later, things have changed dramatically." And here comes Ruth Bader Ginsburg's favorite quote, or my favorite quote of hers. She understood that these laws were what was preventing the abuses I talked about, closing polls, discriminatory tests, purging voter rolls, etc. So her analogy was this, quote, "Throwing out pre-clearance when it has worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet," close quote. So the final quote from her was also in connection to Shelby County, that famous case. She added an emphasis. The arc, this is from Martin Luther King, and she put her own emphasis on it. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice if there is a steadfast commitment to see the task through to completion."
Oh my God, there's a double rainbow.
Cool. A double rainbow. Very cool.
Oh my God.
So I'm interpreting her last comment about steadfast commitment to see the task through to completion by us here committing to keep on acting up and to keep on putting pressure on our leaders, even if every single person that we want to win the election wins. We still can't step back and say, okay, our job is done. We have to stay committed and to keep pressure on all of our politicians. Thanks.
So my favorite quote from RBG is the one where she says, "Women aren't asking for special treatment. We're just asking you to get your foot off our necks." The oppressor is always trying to play it up like he's doling out little gifts, but it's the oppressed who have to stand up and demand what they want, which is freedom, justice, and a fair shake. So it seems very significant. We have a double rainbow here while we're honoring this great passing of this great soul, and feels like creation is with us.